Welcome to the Tailored Mindfulness Experience podcast, your life, your practice. In this podcast, we will interview mindfulness practitioners to learn about what led them to practice, how their practice has shifted and evolved over time, the challenges they faced and benefits they experienced, and how they arrived at the life and practice they have today. We hope this podcast will inspire you to find your own tailored mindfulness experience and discover your unique path to happiness independent of conditions. We are honored to be your support and companions along the way. So welcome, Preethi. It's so nice to see you. So nice to be with you.
Likewise, Paula. It's lovely to be here. And I love the intro piece where you share about it being tailored, right? I mean, that's what our mindfulness practices are.
Yes, so true. And I often hear people say, mindfulness is not for me, because they've heard one particular way or they think they have to have a quiet mind. But what we're here to say is that mindfulness is yours. It's a quality that you actually already have. And it's about discovering it, uncovering it, and finding ways to make it work for you, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to hear about your journey, how you came to mindfulness practice. So maybe we can start there if you want to share with us how you came to mindfulness practice, when you started, what was going on in your life at that time.
Yeah. So I was introduced to meditation first time in 2012. That was a year after my son was born. Till then, I thought I control everything in life. And, once I had my son, I realized I control nothing, And it was also a time where I possibly went through postpartum. I'm not sure because I never got it diagnosed. I went through a severe identity crisis because I'd given up my job. I was at home. I didn't know how to go ahead further. And my husband suggested a meditation program, and it was called The Joy Shop, and by my teacher, Nitya Shanti. And that was the first time I actually ever meditated. And I was like blown away. It was a day-long program. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I felt so peaceful, so calm and everything. And then I came home back to everything else, right? All the peace and calm for 2 days. And then you're back to overthinking. You're back to going back into the same rut. And then for years, I actually did a lot of entertainment meditation, as we call it, where you go on YouTube, you find something that kind of gives you calmness and peace. And my idea of meditation was that, I need to feel calm and peaceful. And it kind of, I was looking for a quick fix, right? And for a very, very long time, I did that till the point I started working in a child psychiatric clinic. And many years down the line after working there, I realized that I need to learn to manage and regulate myself better to actually be able to support someone else. And that was the time actually somebody again guided me back to meditation and mindfulness practices. And that is when I actually started looking at it as a skill development, a way to develop the skill of mindfulness, right? And around that time, I was again training with my teacher, and I wanted to deepen my practice. And I asked him, how can I deepen it? He was like, try UM, right? Unified Mindfulness System. And that's how I came to UM. And then, of course, I've been practicing the Unified Mindfulness System, and I teach the system. And the main reason I teach is to stay with the practice, right? That's one of the primary reasons I teach. And that's usually my opening line in any session, that, I'm teaching because it also benefits me. And
absolutely,
that's a bit on my journey.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so when you said you, at the beginning, you were looking to get calm and peaceful, and it sounds like when you were in the sessions, you did get a little bit of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what were you practicing at the time, and what were you experiencing?
So they were just any kind of YouTube guided meditations with the beautiful music in the background, and the guided sessions that you find on YouTube. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the practice, it was more of, I think I was craving for feel good experience through the practice. And I think it was my limited exposure that meditation can be way beyond just finding calm and peace. And also the fact that I believe now that it's a byproduct of the practice. It's not the end result of the practice, right? So that's something that stood out for me through all those years of doing all kinds of practices on YouTube and trying systems like Kriya Yoga. I tried Reiki. I tried many other things to kind of look for something that'll instantly work for me, right? And that's what all of us look for at some point in life.
Yeah. I think that is a part of the journey, right? At the beginning, it's like, what do I do? Maybe not even just at the beginning, throughout. Sometimes, how do you pick what practice to do? And did you at some point find a way to navigate through that? Like, okay, these are the practices I'm going to focus on. Like, when did you do that?
Yeah, the first time I actually experienced that, okay, I need to do this as a practice more than a fix for something was when I did a program called Rise in Peace. It was called RIP. So that was like 45 minutes. We were meeting for many months consistently as I was practicing. And I started seeing the practice experience transition into my daily life. And that is when I actually figured that the seated practice is important, but if I'm not changing in my daily life, it's not particularly helpful, right? And that was the time I figured that, I can use any form of practice. It really doesn't matter as much, but I also need to see how it's transitioning into my daily life, because my goal has never been very spiritual in nature. It's been more of, I want more of peace of mind. I want to manage my daily life quite well. It's been more of that. So that's what happened with my practice.
Great. And how did you start to see it transitioning? Was it just automatically you saw changes in your life, or were you actually doing some technique during the day?
So at that point, not really a technique, which is actually quite surprising, because I used to do a 45-minute sit in the morning, and they were more of contemplative practices that were being done at that point. And then, you're thinking about a particular question or a particular theme that has been discussed, and, you meditated on in the morning, and you carry that through the day, and you start noticing, it's almost like you walking through a hall of mirrors. You start seeing, problem is not everyone else always, how am I contributing to the problem? And that's how insight development started for me. However, with the practice in terms of behavioral transitions was far more impactful after I started using Unified Mindfulness. When I was using the other practices, I would notice, I would be aware, but my behavioral transitions were slow. But once was introduced, because of the techniques, it kind of supported that and blended well for me to bring about the behavioral changes in life.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I love that question. How am I contributing to the problem, right? It could be hard to see it at first. It's easier to think that if everybody else were to behave more mindfully, ironically, it's like they should be doing mindfulness practice.
Absolutely, right? And for the longest time, I was somebody who was like that, who was like, oh, this person's a problem, that person's a problem, and everything was a problem. Everyone was a problem. And then I was like, okay, everyone's going to be who they are. What can I do about it, right? And that's what those practices at that particular point in time gave me, this sense of awareness about just objectively looking at my own behaviors. Looking at my own way of thinking, my own way of being, and that became very helpful.
Yeah. And can you think of an example, maybe when you had that realization and you shifted something, whether in your parenting or at work, anything?
Yeah, yeah. My parenting, there was a lot of shift because I think that was the time my son was probably 7, 8. He was just, uh, young and naughty. He's still young, but
Yeah.
naughty, definitely. And I almost, if I had a bad day, I would kind of, it would be like a displacement of all my frustration on him. Like, he doesn't eat his
Mm.
dinner, then it's like, why aren't you eating dinner? And why are you doing this? And every time this is what happens, you don't clean up the room. And it's like a spiraling, a downward spiral. And that was the point I actually had this clear realization that it's a baggage I'm carrying.
Mm.
It's a snowballing that I have had. And I'm just dumping it on this child. It's so unfair. It's so unfair. Because there are days when he does that and I'm okay. I don't have a problem. Then why am I doing it today? That kind of shift in realization was very, very helpful to me, to kind of regulate myself to a certain extent. So what I used to do, I used to take myself out of that place because I didn't have any tools to down-regulate myself instantly. So I'd be like, okay, I'll come back in 5 minutes.
Which
Right?
is very powerful, right? Like to just
Yeah.
take the time, and it's modeling that when I'm feeling agitated, it's okay to take a moment to regroup,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I found the same, that at the end of the day, when I'm okay, right? Like if I can, which doesn't mean, I love how you said at the beginning, it doesn't mean that you feel good all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, 'cause sometimes
Yeah.
I might be angry, I might be tired, I might be frustrated.
Yeah.
But even just last night, like I was angry, frustrated, I didn't want to cook dinner, but then I still had to have dinner with my family. So it's like, I almost saw the choice. Like I can just get really cranky about this and be in a bad mood all evening and just
Yeah.
have a bad evening, and then everybody will have a bad evening. Or I can just kind of like accept that it'll pass, right? And just do
Absolutely.
the best I can, maybe stay a little quieter. And that's where, I agree, like the techniques are really helpful. Like something that I've been trying is when I'm tired, but I still have stuff to do, I do feel rest in the
Yes.
midst of activity. So where is there rest right now, right? How can I find rest even though a lot of me, or even just my mind says I'm tired, right? A lot of the times it's just like, well, my mind thinks, well, I've had a busy day and, this and that. And so then I feel tired, but it's really just my mind telling me I'm tired.
Absolutely, right. And for me, I think the biggest thing was the fact that we always think that other people have to make us happy. We have to make other people happy. And there is this particular quote that I think Ramana Maharshi said that, you just take care of your business.
Yeah.
Everything else is taken care of, right? And just that learning to self-regulate, learning to, and feel what you're feeling, right? You're feeling angry, you're feeling upset. It's not that I've stopped feeling angry. I still go back and tell my son what I have to tell him, because that's how you behaviorally work with a child. But not lashing out at a child or not dumping your frustration, I mean, that I think is something that big time. I think mindfulness, in fact, shifted my entire relationship with my child. I think I would have been a very, very different parent to a 12-year-old now if not for the entire practice being a part of my life.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes I wonder if my marriage would have survived.
Yeah. All other relationships, right? All other relationships. I mean, it's quite powerful when you look back and you think and reflect on it.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it's really empowering. Like if I think about our listeners and people that are maybe just starting out and maybe they are in the midst of having, whether it's you hate your job or whether you're having a rocky marriage or partnership, or you're having a difficult time with your kids, that these times from a mindfulness perspective are very fruitful. Like there's a lot to uncover there about how we are interacting and our role in it. I know that Shinzen talks about turning walls into windows. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to say something about what that concept is and whether you
Yeah.
use that in your life.
Yeah. But before I dive into that, you
Sure.
mentioned a lot of life circumstances. In fact, there's a study from Berkeley University which says 50% of our happiness comes from genetics, 10% comes from life circumstances, and 40% comes from intentional action. Right? So mindfulness is that 40% of that intentional action that all of us can take. It's a matter of choice, right? It's a matter of choosing, right? In a moment, how do I want to react? Do I want to react? Do I want to respond? We always have that choice. And that's where the turning walls into windows becomes very interesting, because we decide what's a wall, what's a window at the end of the day. Right. Today, in fact, there was a beautiful video of Pema Chodhan, and she's mentioned there that when it rains, right, if there are raindrops, the sound of the raindrops are so beautiful. If you're sitting and you're just listening to them, it's beautiful. But on that day, if you've planned a wedding outdoor, the same rain can be very, very painful, right? It's ultimately about perception. That's how the walls to windows in some ways works. And of course, in unified mindfulness, we do have various strategies. If you experience a wall, then you can deal with it in different ways. Right? You can anchor away, you can turn towards, understand how are you processing that particular situation. And I think for me, that has been very, very powerful, because understanding that when I'm going through a challenging situation, may not be immediately, not when I'm overwhelmed, but sitting later and just reflecting on what were my thoughts? What was I feeling? Right? And the feeling aspect became very, very prominent, because I realized most of the times when I'm angry, anger is not the first emotion that comes up. It's usually disappointment. It is embarrassment. It is the feeling of not being good enough, which transforms into anger. Right? So it's so powerful to just notice that, oh, it's because of this that I'm reacting on the other person. If I manage this, then everything's fine.
Yeah. So powerful. So true.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about your teachers along the way. So you mentioned you have a teacher. You're still working with the first teacher that you had?
Not presently.
Not anymore.
Not presently, but I do follow him on, all the social media platforms. I do take his courses, and, some of them are online. So I managed to do that. But I think right now, my teachers are people whom I teach. Literally, every session I do becomes a learning session for me, because I realize as I'm teaching, there's so much of stuff happening right within you, right? And you just become so aware of how you're processing information. How are you interacting with people? And that has been very powerful to me. But other than that, of course, a lot of teachers from Ramana Maharshi to Meher Baba to Sai Baba. I mean, there's a plethora of teachers in the Indian system. And of course, Shinzen of the Unified Mindfulness System is been an ever lasting, teacher probably for me.
Yeah. And I love how you talk about, in Unified Mindfulness, we talk about give support and get support, so that for you, and usually I think it's the case for a lot of us, when we give support, we try to help or support somebody else, we learn to.
Absolutely.
And then also when you get support, and this is something I learned because I was always trying to figure things out by myself. And then I spent a lot of time kind of confused or thinking about options. But if we reach out, right, to get support,
Absolutely.
You're giving another person an opportunity to share what they've learned. And you feel like you're not alone in this journey, because it can be confusing, right?
Absolutely. And I think the beauty is every human experience is so subjective. You can't have all the experiences in your life. So when you are supporting someone else, you learn so much about how someone processes their experiences, which is so unique and so different and so beautiful. And for me, giving and getting support are two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you ever give support without getting supported. I think they just go so much hand in hand that we don't realize sometimes that when I started teaching, I was like, I want to teach, right? That was the attitude that I started with. And I was in a session with a 15-year-old girl, and she was dealing with some very challenging situations. And the third session that we met. So the first two sessions, she'd not even look at me, right? She'd be looking down. And the third session, she had the smile on her face. And she said, I can't tell you how much this technique has helped me. I can manage my thoughts better. I can manage myself better. In that moment, I realized that for this child to experience this relief in this moment, Shinzen had to be a Buddhist monk in the 1970s. And there had to be a chain of teachers who had to pass it on, and I had to sit across and teach her, right? And
Amazing.
You just realize the interplay of so many things. And in that moment, she made me realize that the way you are actually supporting is the way you're meant to do it. It's almost like it's happening. There's a happeningness to it. And that was beautiful. That was a beautiful moment for me.
Yeah, that is beautiful. When we see, I think of it, it's almost like flowers, like we're all flowers, right? And we have to bloom, and you watch somebody bloom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
And do you find, what do you generally start your students doing? Like this girl, for example, what practice was she working on?
See, hear, feel.
See, hear, feel.
See, hear, feel. Mm-hmm. It's the go-to practice that I usually work with in most cases. And of course, being sensitive to people's needs, in the sense of if somebody has too much anxiety, then we take that into consideration, and then you make them do only the outer experiences, and we work with that basically.
Yeah. And is that your main practice as well? Or what do you work with?
So
and do you work like one at a time, or do you see what's needed on the day?
So my main practice, I have a main practice which is faith-based, and I find that the attitude of faith in my practice enhances my CC&E when I'm doing my sits, right? So that becomes, so I do a chanting practice. That's one of my main practices. But other than that, feel rest, see, hear, feel, they're happening all through the day in forms of microhit, shorter bursts of practices, 10 minutes practices and stuff. And I do yoga and pranayam. So that also kind of takes care of quite a chunk of the practice in itself. So, it's an eclectic mix of practices, I'd say.
Yeah, that's so wonderful to see how the things that we enjoy and we love, they can be part of the practice too. When I started doing I was a little worried because I do Ashtanga yoga and it takes like a lot of time and I love it. And then I thought, and then I'm going to have to add this extra thing. And then I think it was Chris from the Unified Mindfulness community said, no, you can, that's part of your practice. It's formal like if you're, and same with, I love chanting too. And I'd love to do actually more chanting. We'll have to talk more about the chanting. Do you chant a specific, is it the scriptures from, okay. Beautiful.
It is.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about learning to chant the Yoga Sutras, so maybe we could chat about that.
Wonderful. We should.
Yeah, my teacher does it. She learned it all by heart. And I was like, wow, that would be something, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it would be. And you know what stands out for me, Paula, of the whole thing, that ultimately, when I got into mindfulness or meditation, just as you mentioned, it was one other thing that I had to do. It was like, like I go to the gym, I meditate, right? But the beauty is being able to integrate it into anything you do, right? The day I don't have time to chant, the day I don't have time to do yoga, pranayama, I still practice, right?
Yes.
While teaching, we end up practicing. When we are in a moment like this, we end up practicing. And that's the beauty of mindfulness, right? That it's so integral to everything you do. It doesn't have to be another item on your checklist.
Yes, I love that. And I think it's so important for our corporate clients, people that are really busy, parents, because that's another impediment. Like they feel like, oh, well, I don't have this extra 10 minutes, even 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's okay. If you're walking the dog, if you're commuting to work, if you're driving, as long as you do see, hear, feel out. If you're in a meeting, you can just notice, how do I feel? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? It's really powerful.
Absolutely. And, I had a parent who had an autistic child in the session, and she was kind of getting irritated. She couldn't close her eyes and meditate because the child was walking around, he was making noises. And I kind of told her, use his presence as an object of focus.
Mm-hmm.
Use his sounds. That's ultimately what is meditation. It's you have an object of focus, you're bringing your attention to it, and that's the beauty of the practice. Is that can be anything. We don't have to. This is walls to windows, right?
Yes.
This is how we convert the walls to windows. We don't, even with meditation, we don't consider it as, okay, today I'm unwell. Right? So what can I focus on today? Maybe I can focus on my cough. Maybe I can focus on my back pain. If it's comfortable for people to work with it, then that's a beautiful way to convert walls to windows.
I love that. And this practice of making a person the object of your meditation, my yoga teacher taught me that because when I was having trouble at work, because I'm like, oh, well, my boss or my colleague, like just make them just get really curious. Like, what are they saying? How is it making you feel? Right? What are you saying in response? So just get really curious about the interaction. And I've turned around a number of relationships that way, some colleagues that were challenging, and same with the kids, or even, my husband, if I'm having a difficult patch, it's like, just make it, and people feel the presence, right? Like that's another way of giving support. We don't have to teach mindfulness to give support. If you actually are really present and curious about the person and notice all the ways you're wanting them to be different or wanting things to be different, and just having that kind of back and forth between them and my reaction, and them and my reaction, they can feel your presence. It's beautiful.
Yes. And that's the beauty, right? The way you show up, it really is giving support. The way you role model regulating your own emotions is giving support to anyone who's watching you around, right? Be it kids, be it adults, and that's the beauty of the practice.
Yeah, and you see it in people. Like I remember there was this subway, the ticket person in the subways, and every morning he was smiling and he would say hello to everyone, and he was just having the best time at his job. And then every single person would then smile because he had made, and I'm sure it was hard work for him, right? Like people don't always feel like smiling.
Yes.
And we have to, acknowledge that too. It's not about just kind of plastering the smile on, but it's more about how can we connect with this day, and connect with the people around us, regardless of what's arising.
Absolutely.
So,
and
I
how
think
do you want to
about
show up, right? It's so beautiful. So beautiful.
And our pets too.
Yeah.
Our pets are good models.
They're very good models, they're so kind and forgiving. It's just amazing.
Yeah, so lovely. So, do you want to tell us a bit about the things you're working on now, what you're excited about?
Yes. So, I have been working with a rural school in India for the past year. And so I work with the teachers there, and I work in the regional language. So it kind of, so of course, it goes a little beyond mindfulness as well, because I kind of help them put some, systems in place and things like that. But that's something that's quite exciting for me. And of course, working with children is always exciting. I work with teenagers who are 14 and above, and young adults. That's something very exciting for me, because you just learn so much, and they absorb like, sponge. They're just so like, okay, you tell us what we need to do, we'll try it and we'll come back. And that gets very exciting. And I'm working on a project on habits, which is something I personally struggled with for years. So with mindfulness, so that's also very exciting for me, because habit formation for mindfulness was not one of the easiest things for me to do. I kept falling off the wagon. I kept, it's not just kept, I still do, I mean, the long sits are my goal, but there are times you just can't do it, right?
Yeah.
So, but finding something to kind of keep that going has been something I've worked on for many years. And I can say now, yeah, mindfulness is so integrated into life but it takes that kind of work. It takes falling off. It takes failing multiple times and thinking that, okay, this is not for me, and then coming back to it.
Yeah. And it reminds me of this concept of self-compassion, right? Yes. I wonder if all of us, like I still even to this day feel inadequate in some way. Oh, somebody else is doing it differently. They look so much more concentrated, like the comparison, and to accept ourselves where we're at can make it a little bit easier to stick to it, right? Because it's almost like we break the habit and then we feel bad about ourselves. I'm such a bad meditator. I should just give it up, just eat ice cream.
Absolutely. I mean, that's your inner critique, right? And all of us have a pretty loud one sometimes. And I keep telling people that probably we would never use the words we use for ourselves for somebody else. We'd never tell a friend or talk to a friend as harshly as we speak to ourselves. And I think self-compassion has been a challenge for me in terms of practice, because the first thing I finish a session, I'm like, what went wrong? Oh, this wasn't good. That wasn't good. So it is, again, a learned way of thinking, a learned way of being, right? So I think that's where our practices come in handy, where you start noticing it and you're like, okay, it's time to switch. Maybe I look at what went well. And of course, I need to go back and work on things that are still not good. Self-compassion doesn't, of course, mean that we're going to be like, okay, this is the way I am. I accept myself and I can't do anything more about it, right? But we look at it objectively instead of beating ourselves up and overthinking about it through the day, because I've done that. I've like spent days wallowing in self-pity about, I could have done that so much better and all of that. But I think that's where the practices actually become so helpful. And self-compassion is a wonderful, wonderful practice to kind of do time and again. I'd say, anytime we see we are failing and falling, I think just being there for ourselves as a friend is what we need.
So true. And I think it relates to this idea of habits, right? Like if we've been hearing from the time we were kids that do better, which again, wonderful message in some ways, because you get very good at stuff if you keep telling yourself to do better. But then it's like that habit of balancing that with, and I did my best in this. Like I made a mistake, or maybe this is something I can improve, and I stepped up, or I tried something new. Like the growth mindset. I've also really liked this idea that we're growing, we're learning. We don't need to be perfect. We won't be perfect. But we're growing. Even in our mistakes, we fall down, we get back up, we fall off the wagon, we get back on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is where I find coaching personally very, very helpful for me, the mindfulness coaching. So it becomes so helpful. I mean, even if you fall off the wagon, I just show up and I tell my coach, you know what, I'm not practicing. So it becomes like an accountability partner. Even this inner critique, it gives you an avenue to find tools to deal with that specific concern that you're having in your life. And
Yes.
sometimes, just speaking it out to somebody just gives you a moment of insight that, this is what I'm doing.
So
Right?
true.
So,
Yeah. No, and the coach is also interesting because sometimes we might not be practicing because maybe whatever's arising might not feel safe for us, right? So then somebody else to hold it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes I also have these periods when I overdo it. Like, you tend to overdo it and then, and you keep looking for, my sit was okay. There was nothing in it. And there was nothing in it. Some reassurance, that, it's okay. It's each time you don't need to have experiences, things like that. The kind of normalizing that happens sometimes when you're with a coach is so beautiful that it's not just you, it's a human experience, like, to go through this and just to hear it from another person can just be so comforting to you. And for me, the beauty of having a coach has been to not just keep my practice going, but to also see what are the challenges I have in life and how can I use mindfulness to show up as a better person in these spaces, right? And that's wonderful to have.
That's great. And so do you see your coach on a regular basis? Or does it change depending on what's going on in your life?
So I do try to meet at least a couple of times a month, or at least,
that's great.
Yeah. And I show up even when I'm not practicing. I'm very tempted to say, you know what, I'm too caught up. I can't make it this week. But then I just show up because, I know the help, that support I've got has been so tremendous, because otherwise it's so easy to just be off and get into the rut of life. And again, when you're in a slump, to kind of say that, okay, where's meditation? I need to start practicing meditation, right? So that's been very helpful to me.
That's great.
Yeah.
And do you do micro hits during the day? Like just short little practices? You do?
Yes.
What's your favorite one? Yeah? What's your favorite micro hit?
See, Hear, Feel is my favorite, all-time favorite. So I'm a big coffee drinker, and it's a habit I'm working on. So I drink tons of coffee. I drink a lot of coffee in the day. So I need to do a lot of practice to kind of anchor away from the urge to, continue that habit. And so micro hits become very helpful for me to kind of notice in the moment what is happening. So sometimes with coffee, when it comes, then it's usually I focus on things outside that I don't really need to deal with what's happening inside. It becomes helpful there. So I use quite a few micro hits.
That's great. So maybe I'll ask you, I have one or two more questions, but then at the end, if you wouldn't mind leading us through a little micro hit, that would be lovely.
Yeah, surely.
Great. Yeah. And just my last question would be, anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about, to share with our students, or share about your journey?
I think, I would like to talk about habits itself, because
yes,
I realized that for me, when I started doing the habit of meditation with an expectation of an outcome of calm and peace, I struggled to sustain, it. I really struggled to sustain it. And this comes from James Clear's Atomic Habits, where he talks about creating habits around your identity. How do you want to show up, right? And that's where mindfulness started working for me, when I knew that this was going to be an identity habit, and this was not going to be based on outcomes, because every sit is different. Every sit is going to be, some are going to be amazing, some are not going to be amazing. It's pretty much like going to the gym and having a leg workout day doesn't mean your practice is not working. So So that was a big thing for me to realize that, my habit building works better for me, not when I base it on outcomes. It works better. So that was the first-hand experience I had with mindfulness.
I love that. So identity. So thinking of a way that you're changing, right? So what's an example of an identity habit?
For me, it would be something as simple as putting away my phone when my son is talking to me.
Yes.
Being a more attentive parent, right? Being a more present parent. If that's the identity I want to develop, what is the habit I need to do to develop that?
I love that.
Right? So
Wonderful.
yeah. And in fact, the first time I realized that I am on the phone was, again, because of practice, right? Because my son was talking to me and I was like, I have to send this message, I really have to, right? And he was all excited. He comes to share something and I'm like, no, you'll have to wait.
1 second. Yeah, I
yeah,
do
1
too.
second. I have to send this. And he just walked away. And in that moment, I just did a see, hear, feel in. And I realized that the message I'm giving to this child in this moment is your excitement does not deserve my attention.
So true.
And that was so startling for me because I said, you don't need to spell things out to children. They learn by watching you, right? Watching your behaviors, right? They get these messages of, is this appreciated or not appreciated? And that is where, that was a big identity for me. Like, not that it's a work in progress always. But I believe that having that identity makes it helpful for you to work with the practice.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to use that because I do that too with the kids and they tell me, you're always on your phone. I say, no, I'm not, but maybe I am.
Yeah. And so the funny thing is we don't even realize. Yeah. We don't realize because it's in your hand all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just so automatic, I think, for us to be using it.
Yeah. Wonderful. So maybe you can guide us in a little microhit of your choice. That would be lovely.
Yes, I'd love to take you through a feel rest practice. So you can stretch up, settle in, lengthen your spine, relax your shoulders, and gently close your eyes. And start by taking 3 gentle breaths. Each time, exhale a little longer than you inhale. Now, whenever you're ready, just bring your attention to any part of your body that's feeling tight, tensed. Maybe your shoulders, your arms, your forehead. Just try to tighten the muscles around that area. Hold it for a few seconds. And relax. If you experience any relaxation, you can label it as rest. Else, you can label it as feel. The label just helps you stay with the practice. Just continue to scan your body and find other areas where you can tighten the muscles and relax. And if it's challenging for you to find the tight spots in the body, you can always bring your attention to your breath. And each time as you exhale, just notice how your spine lengthens as you inhale and drops as you exhale. Now just feel a deep sense of rest and relaxation flowing through your entire body. Breathe in like you're smelling a flower, gently and slowly. Slowly blow out from your mouth like you're blowing a candle. You can rub your palms together, place it over your eyes, and gently open your eyes. Thank you for practicing, Paula.
Thank you so much. That was so lovely and such a pleasure to get to know you a bit more. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to work together and practice together. So yeah, thank you, Preethi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Day.
Thank you. And thank you for your wonderful presence. Thank you.